I don't talk about this story in real life anymore. The few times I tried, people reacted the same way, half amused, half uncomfortable. The kind of expression you give someone who's clearly exaggerating or misremembering childhood nightmares. And for a long time, I wondered if maybe they were right. Maybe I really did imagine it. Maybe the things I saw or thought I saw were just the product of an overactive 8-year-old mind. But the memory is too clear. And the ending, what we found years later during the renovation, was too real to ignore. I grew up in a one-story home just outside Austin, Texas. It wasn't a fancy place or anything, just a regular house in a quiet neighborhood. My room was near the end of the hallway on the right side, across from the laundry room. I remember the exact layout because every night I'd stare at the shadows on the ceiling and trace the lines where the walls met, trying not to think about the one thing in that room that terrified me. The vent above my bed. Most bedrooms have vents. That part isn't strange. What made mine different was the size of it. The vent wasn't one of those small rectangular ones you see in most houses. It was almost 3 times longer and twice as wide, like an oversized return vent meant for a hallway or living room. My dad always said the previous owners must have installed the wrong one, but it still works fine, so no reason to change it. The problem wasn't the vent itself. It was the sound that came from it. Every night, as soon as the house got quiet, I'd hear this soft clicking, light rhythmic taps, like someone drumming their fingernails along the metal interior. My parents said it was the AC expanding or the duct settling. Even at 8 years old, I knew metal didn't make patterns like that. And it wasn't random, it was deliberate. 3 taps. Pause. 2 taps. Pause. 3 taps again. Over and over. Sometimes it sounded like someone dragging something across the vent. Slow, faint, but unmistakably intentional. And every once in a while, when the AC wasn't running, I'd swear I could hear faint breathing. I tried to ignore it for months, because telling my parents never helped. They'd always say the same thing. You watch too many scary shows. You're dreaming. You're hearing the house. But I knew better. And then one night, in the middle of July, it finally escalated. That night was brutally hot. Texas summers have a way of making the air feel thick, and even with the fan running, I couldn't sleep. I tossed around for hours, sweating and annoyed. Sometime around 1 a.m., I heard the tapping again, but this time it was completely still in the house. The AC wasn't running. There shouldn't have been any airflow at all. But the tapping was louder than ever. 3 taps, 2 taps, 3 taps. The exact same pattern as always. I remember staring up at the vent, my eyes squinting through the dark. The vent cover was just a silhouette against the ceiling, a dark shape I could barely see. But after a few minutes, I started noticing something strange. The vent cover was moving. Not a lot, but enough. It looked like it was pulling outward slightly, like something behind it was pushing. I sat up in bed, completely frozen. I wasn't the type of kid who jumped out of bed screaming. My fear always hit me in silence, cold, paralyzing silence. I kept staring at the vent, and then I saw it. One of the screws on the right side rotated. Very slowly, clockwise, then counterclockwise. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but then the second screw on the same side shifted, and the metal cover sagged just a little. That's when I heard the breathing. Not faint this time, not imagined. Very real. Deep, slow inhales. Like someone trying to stay quiet but struggling. I couldn't scream. My throat locked up completely. It felt like a hand squeezed the air out of my lungs. All I could do was stare at that vent as the metal cover slowly lowered another inch, hanging lopsided from the remaining screws. And then, something moved behind the slats. A shadow, long, narrow, unmistakably human-shaped, shifted just beyond the metal bars, and I saw something pale press against the slits. Skin, real skin. And then an eye, huge, reflecting the smallest bit of light from my nightlight. Blinking. That's when the whisper came. Barely a breath, but I heard it crystal clear. "Are you awake yet?" My entire body went ice cold. I didn't think I just bolted out of bed, sprinted barefoot across the carpet, yanked the door open, and ran straight to my parents' room. I remember shaking so badly I couldn't talk at first. My mom thought I'd had a nightmare. My dad, annoyed and half asleep, grabbed a flashlight to humor me. We walked back to my room. The vent cover was perfectly in place. All 4 screws tight. Not a single sign of movement. My dad even tugged on it to prove it was secure. "There's nothing in there," he said. "You scared yourself." And that was that. But the next night, the tapping returned. Louder, closer, almost excited. I started sleeping on the living room couch after that. I'd pretend to fall asleep during a movie, and my parents didn't have the heart to move me. I slept there for most of the summer, and for a while, nothing happened. But eventually, my parents insisted I start sleeping in my room again. They said I had to face my fears and stop letting my imagination control me. I begged them to switch rooms with me, even temporarily, but they refused. So on a Thursday night in August, I went back to my room. The moment I stepped inside, the air felt wrong. Heavier, stale. I crawled into bed, pulled the covers to my chin, and tried to think about anything other than the vent. For a while, it worked. I almost fell asleep. Then I heard it, but not from the vent this time. From inside the wall. Scratching. It traveled along the drywall, slow and steady, like something crawling horizontally inside the house structure, moving toward the vent. Every tiny footstep sent chills down my spine. Then it stopped directly behind the vent. I stared up at it, gripping the sheets so tightly my fingers hurt. I could hear something shifting inside, like a person adjusting their position in a tight space. Then the voice came. Not a whisper this time. A low, shaky breath followed by, "Come back to bed." I shot up, ran from the room so fast I almost slipped, and slept in my parents' room that night. The next morning, I refused to go in there at all. I didn't even want to walk past my doorway. My parents got fed up after that. My dad threatened to take my bedroom door off its hinges if I didn't stop acting up, so I learned to keep quiet. I slept in my room again, but I never slept well. I'd lie awake, listening to the faint tapping and breathing until exhaustion would finally force me under. The figure behind the vent never spoke again, but I could always hear it shifting, waiting. This went on for years. By the time I was 10, I learned to sleep with headphones in, blasting music at night just to drown out the sounds. When I turned 14, I finally convinced my parents to let me move into the spare room, and I never slept under that vent again. Eventually, we all forgot about it, or pretended to. Then came the renovation. I was 17 when my parents finally decided to remodel the house. They hired a contractor to redo the ductwork and replace the old AC system. I didn't think much of it until one afternoon when the contractor knocked on my mom's door and said he needed her to see something. I followed them down the hallway out of curiosity. We walked into my old bedroom, the room I hadn't slept in for years. The vent cover was already removed, lying on the floor. The contractor held his flashlight up into the vent, shining the beam deep into the metal duct. "I'm not sure how to describe this," he said, "but you might want to look." My mom stepped up first. Then she froze. completely froze. I moved beside her and looked in. The inside of the duct was coated with dust, thick, undisturbed dust except for one thing. A long drag trail carved right through it, wide, finger-shaped, as if someone had crawled through the vents with their hands dragging behind them. Not just one set. Multiple trails, all leading directly to the opening above my bed. The contractor shook his head. There's no way an animal did that, unless it had hands. My mom went pale. My dad brushed it off, said it must have been a raccoon or something, but even he wouldn't look directly at the marks. We replaced the entire vent system after that, but the marks stayed burned into my memory. People ask why I never called the police, or why my parents didn't. The truth is, what would we have said? A man lived in our vents for years? We never found proof of a person, no hair, no clothing, no nesting area, just those drag marks. And that voice, that whisper I still hear in nightmares. I'm 26 now. I've lived in apartments, condos, places without vents above the bed. But every once in a while, when I turn the AC on at night, I swear I hear it again. 3 taps, 2 taps, 3 taps. And sometimes, when I can't sleep, I imagine a pale eye staring through the slats, waiting for me to look up. Waiting for me to answer the question that started it all. Are you awake yet? When people talk about their earliest memories, they usually describe something harmless, running through sprinklers in the backyard, tasting birthday cake for the first time, watching a cartoon on the living room carpet. My earliest memory isn't like that. Mine is waking up in my crib in the middle of the night and seeing a woman standing in the corner of my room. Even saying the word woman feels wrong because she didn't look like any woman I've ever seen, then or now. She was too tall, too thin. Her neck was long enough that her head seemed to float slightly forward, and her arms hung lower than they should have, the elbows pushed outward at strange angles like she had been assembled incorrectly. Her hair fell straight down past her chest, long, black, and stringy, almost wet-looking, covering most of her face except for the faint outline of a mouth that never seemed to close. She never moved at first. She just stood there, a silent, unnatural shape, blending into the shadowed corner of my room as if that was where she belonged. I remember gripping the bars of my crib, frozen, unsure if I was even awake. The moonlight from the window behind her made her silhouette seem even taller. I tried to call for my mom, but nothing came out. My voice felt trapped inside my chest. I must have stared at her for a full minute before she finally reacted. Her head tilted slightly to the right so slowly it was almost robotic until I could just barely see one eye peeking through the strands of hair. And then she spoke, not loudly, not harshly, but soft, like she was whispering directly into my ear even though she stood several feet away. She said my name. Said it perfectly, as if she'd known it long before I was even old enough to understand what a name was. Hearing it in that voice, calm, slow, almost caring, made something twist in my stomach. It didn't feel like a stranger calling out to me. It felt like someone who thought they had a right to be there. Someone who thought I belonged to her. I screamed. My parents rushed into the room seconds later, turning on the lights, and like a flipped switch, the woman was gone. They told me it was a nightmare. Kids see things. Kids dream with their eyes open. Kids imagine shadows as monsters. I tried to tell them that she said my name. I didn't even know how to pronounce my own name clearly at that age, but she did. My mom brushed it off and held me while I cried. My dad looked annoyed that he'd been woken up. They put me back to sleep and went to bed themselves. But the next night, she came back, and the night after that, and the night after. Always in the same corner, always the same crooked posture, always the same slow, deliberate tilt of her head. Sometimes she would whisper my name. Sometimes she would say nothing at all. Other times, this part I rarely talk about, she would crouch. Her knees would bend outward at those unnatural angles, and she would fold herself down slowly, bone by bone, until her face was level with mine. She never touched me, never came closer than a few feet, but those nights were the worst. The sound of her bones creaking like sticks, bending under pressure, the wet sound of her hair dragging across the crib bars, and the soft whispering breaths that sounded like they were coming from every direction at once. My parents assumed I had an active imagination, but I was too young to even understand imagination. I didn't invent stories. I didn't understand fear the way older kids do. I wasn't seeing monsters. I was seeing a person, a very real person who somehow got into my room almost every night. I would cry, scream, shake, beg not to sleep in that room, and every time my parents responded with frustration or exhaustion. Eventually, they brought a baby monitor into my room so they could hear me if I woke up again. For a while, I thought that would make things better. It didn't. In fact, it made everything worse. The first time it happened, my mom was washing dishes while the monitor sat on the counter next to her. She told me years later that she heard breathing on it, not a baby's breathing. Slow, drawn-out inhaling, like an adult trying to stay calm. She rushed into my room, thinking someone had broken in. But when she opened the door, I was sound asleep. The room was empty. She convinced herself it was interference, or maybe the neighbor's monitor crossing frequencies. That explanation didn't make sense. Our nearest neighbor with a baby lived 2 houses away, but she accepted it because the alternative was impossible. A few nights later, it happened again. But this time, she heard something else, a rustling sound, as if someone was brushing their hand across the microphone. Then a voice, not mine, a woman's voice, whispering my name. My mom sprinted to my room so fast she slammed into the doorframe. But again, I was asleep. The room was empty. The corner where the woman usually stood was completely still. My mom unplugged the monitor that night and tried to tell my dad what she'd heard. He didn't believe her, said monitors glitch all the time, said she was overtired, that she was letting my nightmares influence her. But she admitted years later that she stopped sleeping properly after that. I don't remember when the visits stopped. One night she was there. The next night she wasn't. And then, slowly, my memory of her faded the way early childhood memories usually do. By the time I was 6, I didn't think about her anymore. I didn't remember the corner lady at all. Not until I was 16. One evening, my family was having dinner, and we somehow got onto the topic of childhood fears. My younger sister talked about her fear of the vacuum cleaner. My dad talked about being scared of spiders. I joked about the corner lady from when I was a baby, the woman I thought I saw in my room. I expected everyone to laugh. My mom dropped her fork onto her plate. My dad stopped chewing. They looked at each other with an expression I didn't understand. My mom's face turned pale. My dad shook his head slowly as if warning her not to speak, but she spoke anyway. You weren't supposed to remember that," she whispered. I frowned. "Remember what? It was just a thing I made up." My mom shook her head again. Her eyes started watering before she even said the next words. "I heard her," she said quietly. "More than once." That dinner changed everything I thought I knew about those early years. My mom told me the truth. She had heard a woman's voice on the monitor several times. She heard breathing, whispering, and once this part she struggled to get out. She heard the voice say something that still makes me cold when I think about it. "Shh, I'm with him right now." My parents searched the room, the closet, the hallway, the entire house. They never found anyone, never found evidence of a break-in, never found anything missing or moved. But my mom swore the voice was real. She knew what she heard. My dad finally admitted that one night he heard it too, not through the monitor, but from the hallway. A woman's whisper inside my room. He thought it was my mom at first. When he realized she was asleep next to him, he froze. He didn't investigate. He didn't want to see what was inside. I asked them why they never told me. My mom said it was because I was so young, and eventually the visits stopped. They didn't want to scare me for the rest of my life. But hearing that, the thing I remembered, the tall, thin woman with the hair-covered face, wasn't a hallucination, made something inside me unravel. For months, I couldn't sleep without thinking about her. How long had she been coming into my room? How did she know my name? How did she get inside the house without leaving a trace? And why did she stop? That question bothered me the most. What made her stop coming? What changed? My mom said the last time she heard the voice through the monitor was the night after my aunt came to stay with us for a few days. My aunt slept on the couch in the living room. She was a night owl, so she stayed up late watching TV. My mom thinks maybe the woman didn't want to risk being seen by someone awake. That idea didn't help me sleep. Years passed. I moved out, went to college, lived in dorms and apartments. For a long time, I convinced myself that whatever happened was some kind of bizarre, unsolved part of my childhood. A mystery I would never understand and never fully believe. Then, a few months ago, something happened. I was visiting my parents during winter break. My old room had been repainted and turned into my mom's hobby room, but the layout was still the same. Same window, same corner, same quiet, lonely feeling at night. I was sleeping in the guest room down the hall when I woke up around 3 a.m. for no reason. It wasn't a sound that woke me. It was a feeling, a heaviness in the air that reminded me exactly of how my bedroom felt when I was a kid. Thick, heavy, like someone was holding their breath in the dark. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to shake it off. Eventually, I turned onto my side and froze. The guest room faces directly down the hallway. From where I was lying, I could see straight into my old bedroom. The door was open. The room was dark. But in the corner, my corner, I saw something. A shape, tall, thin, motionless. My heart stopped. For a moment, I thought I was dreaming. Thought my brain was playing tricks on me. But then, the shape moved, and the head tilted, the exact same way it tilted when I was a baby. Slowly, precisely, as if the bones in her neck were bending one by one. I couldn't breathe, couldn't scream, couldn't move. I just watched as she lifted one long, thin arm. Her hand dangled from her wrist like it was barely connected, and then she pointed at me. Not the room, not the hallway, directly at me. My breath caught in my throat as she spoke for the first time in more than 20 years. In that same soft, intimate whisper, the one that felt like it slid directly inside my ear. You remember me. I don't know what happened after that. I blacked out. My parents found me on the floor just outside the guest room doorway. I didn't tell them what I saw. I couldn't. Because saying it out loud would make it real, and part of me still wished it wasn't. I left the next morning, haven't visited since, haven't slept properly since. I keep my lights on every night. I keep my doors locked. I've taped over the bottom of my closet door. I don't know what she is. I don't know what she wants. I don't know how she found me again after all these years. But the worst part, the part that keeps me awake every night, is that she didn't sound angry when she spoke. She sounded relieved, like she'd been waiting, like she'd finally gotten something she wanted, like she knew that now that I remembered her, I could never forget her again. And sometimes, when the house is quiet and I'm lying awake at night, I swear I hear her voice again, soft, slow, patient, coming from the darkest corner of my room, saying my name. In 2012, I was 17 and living with my mom and my 12-year-old brother, Mason, in a small rental home on the outskirts of Hope Mills, North Carolina. Right near the tree line where the woods grew too thick and too dark, even during the day. The kind of place where neighbors kept their blinds closed at night and dogs didn't like going outside after dusk. And I never thought anything truly strange would ever happen there. Until the week everything changed. Starting with the nights Mason came into my room complaining that something was moving under his bed. I kept telling him it was just the old house settling, or the raccoons that sometimes crawled under the floorboards. But the way he described it made my skin crawl. Even then he said it wasn't scratching or scurrying, but breathing, slow and heavy like someone lying on their stomach, exhaling into the dust. The first time he told me that, it was around 2 a.m., and he was shaking so badly, I let him sleep on my floor, thinking it would pass. But the next night, he came back again, even more terrified, saying he'd heard his name whispered from underneath his mattress, and even though I didn't believe him, I didn't have the heart to send him back. Mom worked nights at the hospital, so it was just us two boys in the house, and for the next few nights he insisted on keeping the hallway light on, because the shadows in his room moved wrong, as he put it. Around the fourth night, I finally got tired of the whole thing and decided to prove nothing was under the stupid bed. I grabbed a flashlight and went into his room while Mason stood behind me clutching my shirt. But the moment I knelt down, something about the silence felt off. Not just quiet, but thick, like the air under his bed was heavier than it should have been. And when I shined the flashlight under there, I expected dust, maybe a toy or two, but the beam didn't illuminate anything. It just disappeared into the blackness, like shining into a tunnel. The underside of his bed wasn't deep at all, barely 8 inches from floor to mattress, yet the darkness looked deeper, wrong, like it was swallowing the light instead of reflecting it. I remember blinking a few times thinking maybe the batteries were dying, but the flashlight worked fine everywhere else in the room. Only when I pointed it under the bed did the light seem to die. I told Mason it was fine, that it was just shadows. But after I got up, I noticed he was staring past me, toward the wall, where the vent was rattling faintly, even though the AC wasn't on. That night, instead of sleeping, I stayed awake in my room listening for anything unusual. And sometime around 2:40 a.m., I heard footsteps, not the house creaking, but actual footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from Mason's room. I thought maybe he'd gotten up to use the bathroom, but when the steps reached the hallway, they stopped right outside my door. I whispered, "Mason?" But he didn't answer. I got up, opened the door, and there he was, standing in the hallway, pale, eyes wide, saying he heard breathing again. I walked him back to his room, telling him I'd stay this time until he fell asleep. I sat in the chair beside his bed, scrolling on my phone while he drifted off. For a while, everything was normal. Then I heard it the same thing he'd described. Not loud, not obvious, but undeniably there. A slow exhale, like someone with clogged lungs breathing out dust. It came from directly under me, beneath the bed. I froze. The sound came again, deeper this time, followed by something shifting against the wooden floorboards. I stood up so fast, the chair tipped over. My first instinct was to drag Mason out of the room, and I did, shook him awake and practically carried him into the hallway. Once he was out, I slammed his door shut. I didn't want to tell him I had heard it too, so I lied and said it was the house again, but I knew better. For 2 days afterward, nothing happened. Mason refused to sleep in his room, so Mom let him stay in hers, and I slept with my door locked. But on the third night, when I was alone in the house again while Mom worked the 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift, I heard something that made every fear come flooding back. It was the sound of Mason's bed creaking, slowly, like someone sitting on the edge of it. I knew he wasn't in there, I tried to ignore it at first, but then came a soft dragging noise, like fingers trailing against the floor. I walked into the hallway and stood outside his door, listening. And then, clear as day, I heard a whisper from inside his dark room. It wasn't a voice I recognized. It was too low, too rough, almost like it was forcing each syllable out through a throat filled with gravel. It whispered my name. Twice, I backed away, went into the living room, and turned on every light I could find. I stayed awake until Mom got home. When I told her something was wrong with Mason's room, she brushed it off and said I'd been reading too many creepy stories online. But that same evening, while she was folding laundry, Mason ran into the living room saying he saw a hand reach out from under his bed, a hand that wasn't attached to an arm, just pale fingers curling around the bottom frame. I could see the fear in him. He wasn't making it up. Mom went to check herself, but of course, she found nothing. She told us both to stop encouraging each other's imaginations. That night was the worst of all. Mason slept in her room again, and I kept my door open to feel less alone. Sometime after 3 a.m., I woke up to a sound coming from the hallway. A soft thump, then a dragging noise, then another thump. It got closer. My heart started racing because it didn't sound like footsteps. It sounded like something pulling itself along the floor. When it reached my doorway, I held my breath. Then, something long and pale slid just inside the room. I thought it was a hand at first, but it was too long, too thin, with joints that bent the wrong way. A shape that made me instinctively recoil. It lingered there for a moment before sliding back out. I couldn't move. Eventually, the sounds faded, and after maybe 10 minutes of agonizing silence, I got up, grabbed my baseball bat, and walked toward Mason's room because the dragging sound had gone in that direction. What I saw made my blood turn cold. His bedroom door was half open, and from where I stood, I could see underneath the bed. Something was sticking out, not a hand this time, but what looked like the back of a head. Just the back, motionless, the hair dark and matted. I whispered, "Mason," even though I knew it wasn't him. The head moved slightly, too smooth, like it didn't have bones. Then it slowly began to withdraw under the bed until it vanished completely. I ran. I grabbed Mason and Mom, forced them into the car, and told them we needed to leave right then. I don't think Mom believed me fully, but the fear in my voice must have convinced her. We stayed at my aunt's house for the rest of the month. When Mom finally went back to get our things, she told me something I'll never forget. Mason's bed had been dragged 6 inches away from the wall, and the floor underneath it was scratched to hell long. Deep grooves, like something with nails, had been clawing its way out or dragging itself back in. We moved out a week later. Mason still refuses to sleep in any room unless the bed sits flat on the floor. And sometimes, late at night, I swear I still hear it, the slow breathing, right beneath me, like whatever was under his bed never actually stayed behind. It just found a new place to wait.